Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Question Time with myself, Harry Knight. I'm going to be going through some more of your questions and comments from social media posts, and I hope you guys find this little discussion interesting. So our first comment this week is a response to the little maths challenge that I set you guys last week. For those of you that haven't watched last week's episode, I will put a link down below, so go and check it out. But we were talking about surfboard rocker, and in particular in reference to episode 8 of Surfing Explained, which I'll also link below. But we were talking about how when a surfboard has lots of tail rocker, that the water flowing along the bottom of the board will follow that curve and therefore exit going upwards. And that by sending the water upwards, we create a downwards force on the tail of the board, which makes the board feel a little slower in the water. And we were trying to just come up with a ballpark idea for the magnitude of this force. And we used some, I think, fairly conservative numbers. We came up with the idea that this flow of water would be about 16 litres per second, which is nearly 1,000 litres a minute. It's quite a good flow rate. But that would be about 16 kilos of water per second. And our kind of conservative estimate was that it was doing about 4 metres per second, which is about 14 kilometres an hour. And then just based on some observations I made with some surfboards, we're using 10 degrees as the upwards angle of the rocker at the back of the board. Now, with all of that put together, that was a little bit beyond my personal math skills to come up with an answer, but luckily just Paolo got in touch, and he said that this was something he'd studied when he was at university, and he made the observation that what we're doing here is we're taking an object that has a horizontal velocity, and we're adding a vertical component to that. And what therefore happens is, as we send the water upwards, we create an equal and opposite downwards force on the board. But what we're also doing is subtracting from the horizontal component of that. Now, his estimate based on, his calculation, sorry, just Paolo, his calculation based on these numbers was that it would be about a 1.1 kilogram of downward force, okay, which is not insignificant. It's not huge, but it's not insignificant. But the really important bit is that we're also losing 1.1 kilos of that horizontal force, which is driving the board forward. So of our 16 kilos of horizontal force, we're actually losing about 7% of that horizontal force, okay? So that's, fairly significant, and it's why, a board with a lot of tail rocker is just going to feel a little bit slower than a board with a flat tail rocker. So anyway, I was really, really excited to get that answer. I hope that's an interesting sort of conclusion to our discussion last week, and that you guys enjoyed that. Thank you, just Paolo. You get extra points from my high school maths teacher as well for showing all your working. So if anyone's interested in this, go and have a look at the comment feed of last week's video, and you can see how he got this number of 1.1 kilos. Cool. Okay, so our first question this week then comes from Gerard Kluvers. Gerard, I'm really sorry if I butchered your name. My apologies, names are not my strong point. Anyway, Gerard's question was about whether or what the relationship is between fin size and the weight of the surfer. And this is a great question. We've actually got an episode of Surfing Explained coming out very, very soon, where we're going to talk all about the different dimensions on a surfboard fin and how they affect the way that the board rides. But I wanted to jump on this question just very quickly because I think some of the advice that's given about what size fins you should ride, I find myself giving some slightly different advice quite often when I'm teaching, and I thought this would be a really good opportunity to pass that on. So before we get into that, let's just very quickly make sure we're all on the same page with fin size. So how do you measure a fin? Well, it depends what type of fin we're talking about. Okay, so if we're talking about big single fins on boards, then generally you measure the height, or I guess the depth, depending which way up the board is. But we measure the height of the fin, normally in inches. And the advice that you often hear given is that you should ride the same height fin in inches as the length of the board in feet. So say a 6-foot board, you should put a 6-inch fin, and a 9-foot board, you should put a 9-inch fin. So that's how that's normally done. Now on smaller boards, on boards that have a 3-fin thruster setup, the size, they're normally done in small, medium and large. Sometimes you'll find extra large, sometimes you'll find extra small. But it's normally done with reference to the surface area of the fin. Okay. What I'll do, I'm going to link to a web page down below where FCS have all of their different fins tabled up, and you can sort of compare it. Now, one of the things that you'll notice on that is that if you move away into sort of specialty fins like twin fins, keel fins, things like that, there isn't really a numbering system that we use to define whether a fin is bigger or smaller. But nowadays, with the wonders of the web, you can see again on that website, you can see the different sizes of those fins. So I find that table quite interesting. Anyway, the way that those, certainly the small, medium and large fins are recommended is generally by weight. So for me at 80 kilos, they recommend a large fin that I should be riding. Now, before I get on to my advice, I just want to talk about what the fin's doing for us, and we spoke about this a little bit in episode 5 of Surfing Explained. But the fin's basically there to do 2 jobs. One is to provide stability and just stop the tail from slipping and sliding around, and the other is to help the rail engage with the wave face and give the board traction across the wave. Now, when these size recommendations, particularly for the smaller boards, for the thrusters, the small, medium and large, when those are drawn up, they're very much geared towards quite advanced riders who do actually want the tail to slip and slide occasionally. They want that ability. And actually not only that, the recommendations go back. They've been around for quite a long time. And if we go back 15, 20 years to when those recommendations were drawn up, the style of surfing that was popular involved a lot of slipping and sliding, doing little spinning 360s on waves and things like that. Now, the style of surfing that most people aspire to, I think now has changed a little bit, and big on-rail turns are seen as much better. And the other side is that obviously for most surfers in the water, most of the people that I'm teaching, where we're talking, level 1, level 2, level 3, and into early level 4, we actually don't want the tail to slip and slide too much. We're trying to build our confidence in putting the board on rail. So my recommendation is very often to just ride the biggest set of fins that you can find. You want to have, as we're learning to do really good solid bottom turns and cutbacks in level 3, we're starting to do some more aggressive surfing level 4, we really just want to be able to rely on the surfboard. We want it to be solid and dependable underneath our feet. And then as we push into some more of the performance maneuvers in level 4, that would be a really good time to start thinking about, maybe scaling the fins down and starting to get the board to slip and slide a little bit. So yeah, that's very often my advice. The same is true actually with big single fins. If we're riding boards with big single fins, again, we probably, most of us, are going to want the board to feel a little bit more stable through those bottom turns, through those cutbacks, and through cross-stepping up onto the nose. We don't want the tail to slip and slide out, and so generally, again, I would say, just put a slightly bigger fin in is going to be beneficial for you. And you'll actually even see that nowadays on the World Tour. If you look at the fins that a lot of the guys are riding, that they are also riding bigger fins. Carissa Moore's a great example. I think she's about 5'7" and 140 pounds, something like that. 170 centimeters and 60 kilos, something like that. But she rides a large fin, even though the recommended on the scale, she would be a small fin. But she rides large fins, and if you watch her surfing, she has no problem whatsoever blowing the tail out the back of waves and getting the board to do all sorts of cool stuff. So yeah, I would recommend generally slightly larger fin. It will not do you any harm whatsoever. Okay, let's get rid of this. Okay, so our last question for this episode came from several people actually. We had Yuli101, we had Michael Smith, we had Lucas Processi. My apologies to anybody whose name I butchered again. For those of you guys that don't know me, I'm actually quite dyslexic, and breaking words into syllables is one of the things I really struggle with. So just be prepared for some butchering of names in future episodes as well, and my apologies to everybody involved. Anyway, those three people were all asking variations on the same question, which was, how do the materials we use on the board affect the buoyancy of the board? And we've actually got a whole episode coming out tomorrow on Surfing Explained, and we're going to talk about the construction of a board and how the different materials affect different properties. So if you find this interesting, definitely tune in tomorrow for more on that. But I wanted to just jump in on this because this is something where, again, I've seen a lot of information online, a lot of people with opinions online, and I think it would be fun to just throw a little bit of data at the problem. So bear with me on this. So little recap from last week when we were talking about salt water versus fresh. Buoyancy is created when we push an object into the water, and the weight of the water that we displace creates an upward force. So we get a 30-litre surfboard, push it into the water, that is going to displace 30 kilograms, more or less, of water, and that's our upwards force. Now we have to offset that against the weight of the object. Now a 30-litre surfboard is fairly lightweight, it's about 3 kilos, about 7 pounds for a shortboard. So 30 kilos pushing upwards, 3 kilos down, we're definitely going to float, and float pretty high. Now, the first tricky part with this is you can't think about just the surfboard. You have to think about the surfer that is in on top of the board as well. So actually that 30 kilos of upwards force is not only holding the board, it's also got to hold the person as they lie on the board and paddle, and that's why, 80 kilos of me lying on the board, I'm going to be semi-submerged in the water as I'm paddling because I'm heavier than the upward buoyant force. Now, what we then need to look at, okay, is how these materials will change the weight of the board and what that will do for us. Okay, so first things first, epoxy versus polyester resin in the fiberglass will make zero difference. Epoxy boards are not lighter, okay? Epoxy is just the resin that you pour onto the fiberglass, and you need the same amount of resin regardless of which one you use. So that's not going to make any difference. What will make a difference is the foam that we use inside the board, okay? Now the two standard ones that you see are polyurethane foam, sometimes called PU, and expanded polystyrene foam, so EPS, okay? And there is a bit of a weight difference. You can actually get both foams in heavier and lighter densities, but in general for surfboards, so with the EPS foam, okay, the EPS foam for our 30-litre surfboard is going to weigh in around half a kilo to maybe a kilo, okay, in weight for that foam core. If we use PU foam, generally that's going to be a little bit heavier, and it's going to be about 1 to 1.5 kilograms. So, that's a good difference. If you go from the heaviest PU foam to the lightest EPS, then that's going to be a 1 kilogram difference between the two. And we said that the board's going to weigh in about 3 kilos, so that's a 30% change in the weight of the surfboard, which is, that's quite significant. But as we said, we have to think about the surfer on top as well, okay? And so the big problem here, if, let's take me, I'm an 80 kilo surfer sitting on top of our board, okay? So our 1 kilogram difference, that is less than a 1% change once we include the surfer. Now, I realize I'm a little bit heavier maybe than the average surfer, so if we think about a 45 kilo, 100 pound surfer in the same situation, well, then maybe it's 2%, but it's still a really, really small change. And again, as we were talking about last week, the human body varies in weight over the course of a day by like 2 to 3 kilograms. So you're not going to feel a difference in buoyancy between an EPS and a PU core unless you're also feeling a difference in buoyancy depending on when you last ate, when you last went to the bathroom, all of those, because that's going to make a bigger difference to your buoyancy. I promise that it is. Now, what you will feel a difference with these two cores, the thing you will feel is the way that vibrations and sensations from the water are transmitted through the board and into your body. EPS is more rigid, and as the waves and the little ripples hit the bottom of the board, that gets transmitted through to our feet in a different way to the PU, which has a little bit more flex to it. Okay, that's what you're feeling. When you feel the difference in the board, that's what it is. It's not the weight difference of the board. Now, the other type of construction that's become quite popular recently is wooden boards. Now, I'm not talking about like the Firewire TimberTech boards where it's still a foam board, it's just a very, very thin veneer of fiberglass. And we're going to be talking about those in the future as well. But I'm talking about like a proper hollow wood board with a wood frame on the inside and wood skin. Now, on a shortboard, those are going to end up significantly heavier. I mean, they can be 2 to 3 times the weight of a shortboard. Now, the weight distribution is a little bit different in longboards, which is why you quite often see wooden boards being made bigger, longboards and mid-lengths, because this weight distribution is a little bit better. But that's going to be a 10, 15, maybe even 20% difference when you start thinking about the rider and the board as a whole, and you are going to feel that. So when you jump on a wooden board, it will sit lower in the water, you will sit lower in the water, and it may just take a little bit more paddling to get into the wave. But a lot of people find that extra weight adds momentum, and it actually, once you've got the board moving, and you can glide into the wave actually a little bit more easily. So there are pluses and minuses to both sides, and we could have that debate down in the comment stream if you want. But yeah, wood versus foam. There isn't necessarily a better and worse. There's just better for different things. Cool. Okay, I hope that was interesting. I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and I hope you will join me again next week. But for now, from me, take care and goodbye.